You hear the silk curtains breathe in the darkness. Somewhere beyond these palace walls, the city sleeps, unaware of what unfolds in this chamber. But you are here, in this moment, feeling the cold marble beneath delicate feet, watching as trembling hands reach for a door that should never have to open. The scent of rosewater cannot mask the terror. And then, the scream. Not the kind that comes from surprise or pain, but the kind that tears through centuries. The kind that historians will spend lifetimes trying to explain away. Before we step further into this night, I'd love to know where in the world you're joining me from. It's extraordinary how a story buried for 600 years can find its way to your screen today. Wherever you are, this is Constantinople, heart of the Ottoman Empire, in the spring of 1623. The wedding festivities for Princess Fatma Sultan have just concluded. For 7 days, the city has been drunk on celebration. Fireworks painting the Bosphorus, musicians filling every courtyard, gifts of gold and pearls exchanged between the most powerful families in the known world. The empire has just sealed an alliance through marriage, the way it always does, the way it must. And now, as the final guests depart and the torches burn low, the real purpose of this entire spectacle is about to unfold. Princess Fatma is 17 years old. She is the daughter of Sultan Ahmed Furwurn, a man whose word could topple kingdoms. She has been educated by the finest scholars, speaks 4 languages, and possesses a mind sharp enough to grasp the complexities of statecraft that most men in the empire could never comprehend. She is also, at this very moment, more terrified than she has ever been in her entire life. Because what is about to happen to her has been designed, refined, and perfected over generations. It has a name, whispered only in the deepest chambers of the imperial harem. Terbiye-i-Mukber, the sacred preparation. And despite everything she has been taught, despite every ritual she has endured to prepare for this night, nothing could truly ready a human soul for what comes next. The question that haunts the archives, the one that Ottoman historians spent centuries trying to bury, is this: what could transform a wedding night, supposedly the beginning of a new life, into an ordeal so terrifying that princesses would rather die than endure it? To understand that scream, we must first understand what it meant to be born female into the most powerful dynasty on earth. From the moment of her first breath, Princess Fatma belonged to the state. Not in the metaphorical sense that all royals serve their country, but in the most literal, suffocating way imaginable. Her body was an asset. Her bloodline was currency. Her future was a bargaining chip in an endless game of imperial chess, and she was never meant to be a player, only a piece to be moved. The Ottoman political system had, by the 17th century, perfected a brutal efficiency. The empire sprawled across 3 continents, controlling trade routes that funneled unimaginable wealth into Constantinople. But size created vulnerability. Powerful governors could rebel. Ambitious generals could turn their armies against the throne. The key to maintaining control was not just military might, but loyalty. The kind of loyalty that bound a man's fate so completely to the sultans that betrayal became unthinkable, and there was no bond stronger than blood. When a powerful pasha married a sultan's daughter, he wasn't just gaining a wife. He was being chained to the throne with links forged from flesh and dynasty. His children would carry royal blood. His fortune would be tied to imperial favor. His very survival would depend on the sultan's goodwill. It was a leash made of gold and silk, but a leash nonetheless. This meant that princesses like Fatma were never raised to be wives in any recognizable sense. They were raised to be offerings. Fatma's childhood was spent in the innermost sanctum of Topkapi Palace, in the section known as the harem, a word that in Ottoman Turkish means forbidden or sacred. It was a world entirely separate from the rest of the palace, governed by its own hierarchy, its own rules, its own silent language of power. Here, surrounded by hundreds of servants, eunuchs, and slave women, Fatma grew up in a golden cage so beautiful that many never realized they were trapped. Her mother, Kosum Sultan, was one of the most formidable women in Ottoman history. Born a slave, she had risen to become the power behind the throne, outlasting sultans and orchestrating the fate of an empire. She loved her daughter in the way that mothers do. But she also understood, with brutal clarity, what Fatma's purpose was. Every lesson in Persian poetry, every hour spent learning diplomacy and history, every moment of refinement. It was all in service of making Fatma valuable. Not happy, valuable, because in this system, a princess's education was never for her own benefit. It was packaging. As Fatma entered her teenage years, something shifted. The lessons in languages and music continued, but a new curriculum began. It had no formal name in the official records because officially it did not exist. But in the whispered conversations of the harem, it was known simply as the preparation. The woman who oversaw this process was Gulnar Hatun, the chief instructress of the royal princesses. She was not cruel in the way we typically imagine cruelty. She did not raise her voice or strike her students. Her method was far more insidious. She was a sculptor of minds, and her medium was shame, repetition, and the systematic destruction of selfhood. The first phase was psychological. In stark, unadorned rooms far from the opulent chambers where Fatma had spent her childhood, Gulnar would sit across from the princess and teach her a new vocabulary. Words like "I want" or "I feel" were gently, persistently reframed as selfish, even treasonous. Duty was everything. Personal desire was weakness. The histories of previous princesses who had served the empire well through their marriages were recited like prayers, their suffering carefully edited out, their obedience lionized. Day after day, week after week, Fatma was taught that she, as a person, did not exist. There was only the dynasty, only the bloodline, only the empire's need. But this was only the beginning. The second phase was physical, and it remains one of the most disturbing aspects of Ottoman royal life, largely because it was so methodically designed and so carefully hidden from official record. In the privacy of a guarded chamber, Fatma was introduced to what can only be described as rehearsals. A life-sized mannequin was brought in, anatomically detailed, constructed with the precision of something meant to serve a very specific function. And with this silent, unfeeling partner, Fatma was made to practice. Not just once, not just a few times, but over and over, until every movement became muscle memory, until her body learned to perform on command, divorced entirely from emotion or will. She was taught the exact angles her body should assume, the precise ways she should move, the appropriate sounds she should make, or, more often, the silence she should maintain. Every session was clinical, cold, and utterly dehumanizing. The goal was not to prepare her for intimacy, but to condition her for endurance, to teach her body to submit while her mind retreated somewhere else entirely. This was the secret that Ottoman historians would spend centuries obscuring. This was the machinery behind the fairy tale. And the cruelest irony? This entire system was presented as care, as education, as the sacred duty of preparing a princess for her glorious role. The suffering was reframed as sacrifice. The trauma was called training. And because it happened behind closed doors, witnessed only by women who were themselves trapped in the same system, it could be denied, minimized, or erased from history entirely. By the time Fatma's 17th birthday arrived, the transformation was complete. The curious, brilliant girl who had once asked questions about the world beyond the palace walls was gone. In her place stood a perfect imperial offering, mind shackled, body conditioned, spirit carefully, methodically broken. The wedding was announced. The groom, Kara Mustafa Pasha, a powerful military commander whose loyalty the Sultan needed to secure, began his journey to the capital, and Fatma, standing in her chambers as servants draped her in layers of silk and gold, felt nothing at all, which was exactly what she had been taught to feel. The wedding ceremony itself was a masterpiece of imperial theater. 7 days of festivities that transformed Constantinople into a stage for Ottoman power. Foreign ambassadors watched in awe as elephants paraded through the streets, as fountains ran with rosewater, as musicians played compositions written specifically for this union. The wealth on display was staggering. Jewels from Persia, silks from China, gold from Egypt. Every detail was choreographed to send a message. This empire is eternal. This dynasty is unshakable. This marriage is destiny. And at the center of it all was Fatma, moving through the ceremonies like a beautiful ghost. To the observers, she was the picture of regal composure. Graceful, serene, the perfect Ottoman princess. They could not see the numbness beneath the silk. They could not hear the silence screaming inside her mind. The feasting ended. The guests departed. And as midnight approached, Fatma was led by her attendants toward the nuptial pavilion. This was not a bedroom in any ordinary sense. It was a purpose-built structure, designed with a specific and horrifying function in mind. The chamber was arranged on 2 levels. The upper level, lavishly decorated with carpets and cushions, lit by oil lamps that cast everything in warm, deceptive gold. And below, hidden in the shadows of an adjoining space, stood the witnesses. They were not there by accident or perversion. They were official verifiers, senior religious scholars, trusted advisors to the Sultan, men whose sole purpose was to listen and later testify that the marriage had been consummated, that the political contract had been sealed, that the alliance was now bound in flesh. Their presence transformed what should have been intimate into something else entirely, a public ritual disguised as a private act, a transaction witnessed like the signing of a treaty. Fatma understood this. She had been taught to expect it. But knowing and experiencing are not the same thing. As she entered the upper chamber, as her husband, a man she had barely spoken to, whose face she had seen only in carefully orchestrated meetings, approached her, everything she had been taught was supposed to take over. The rehearsals were meant to make this mechanical. The conditioning was meant to make this bearable. But the human spirit, even when broken, does not surrender easily. The first scream, according to the clinical reports later filed by the witnesses, came approximately 15 minutes after the doors were closed. It was, they noted with detached precision, a cry of evident distress. The second came shortly after, sharper, more piercing. But it was the third scream that made even the hardened religious scholars in the chamber below flinch. It was not a sound of pain exactly. It was something worse. It was the sound of something inside a person shattering beyond repair, the death of selfhood witnessed in real time. The witnesses made their notes. The requirement was fulfilled. The marriage was official, and the princess who had entered that chamber ceased to exist. What emerged in the following days was a living ghost. Fatma stopped speaking, not just to her husband, but to everyone. She would sit for hours, staring at nothing, her eyes carrying a blankness that terrified even her own mother. Servants would enter her chambers to find her standing motionless by a window, or lying in bed with her eyes open, utterly unreachable. The court physicians were summoned. They examined her, consulted their texts, and delivered their diagnosis. Virginal melancholy. It was not a real medical condition. It was a euphemism, a convenient fiction that pathologized her trauma while protecting the system that had created it. The diagnosis implied that the fault lay in her delicate female constitution, not in the brutal machinery of imperial marriage. Her husband, now bound to the throne by blood and law, found himself with a wife who was a wife only on paper. She performed her public duties when absolutely necessary, appearing at ceremonies with the same empty grace. But in private, she had built a fortress of silence that no command could penetrate. She lived 3 more years. The official cause of death, recorded in 1626, was wasting fever. But everyone who had known her understood the truth. Princess Fatma had died on her wedding night. Her body had simply taken time to follow, and the most haunting detail, the one that reveals the full scope of this tragedy, she was not unique. Her sister, Geverhan Sultan, was married at 14 to a pasha twice her age. Another sister, Aishi Sultan, endured decades in a loveless political marriage, her letters revealing a profound, quiet desperation. Their cousin, Hanzada Sultan, was married and remarried as alliances shifted, her life a series of strategic relocations disguised as weddings. The pattern was everywhere, once you learned to see it. The system was not broken, it was working exactly as designed. But to assume these women were only victims is to miss something crucial. Because in the margins of Ottoman archives, in the letters that were never meant to be preserved, in the observations of foreign ambassadors who noticed things the empire wished they hadn't, there is evidence of resistance. Small acts of defiance that could never topple the system but preserved something essential nonetheless. Princesses who, after enduring their wedding nights, simply refused to ever speak to their husbands again. For years, for decades, until death. Women who used their limited power to protect younger princesses, to delay marriages, to create small spaces of mercy within a merciless structure. These were not revolutions. They were whispers of rebellion in a world where screaming accomplished nothing. The story of Princess Fatma was deliberately obscured by Ottoman historians, who wrote their chronicles to glorify sultans, not to document the suffering of daughters. For centuries, the official narrative presented these marriages as joyous alliances, the princesses as willing participants in the empire's glory. The rehearsals, the conditioning, the witnesses hiding in shadows. All of it was carefully edited from the record. But paper burns. Memories do not. The truth survived in fragments, in the diary of a Venetian ambassador who noted the peculiar arrangements of Ottoman wedding nights, in the account of a palace physician who recorded treatments for what he delicately called post-nuptial disturbances, in the architectural plans of pavilions designed with those specific two-level structures. The evidence was scattered, obscured, but never entirely erased. Today, Fatma's tomb stands in a modest turbe in Istanbul, visited by few. There is no inscription explaining what she endured, no monument acknowledging the machinery that destroyed her. History, as it was written by the empire, has no space for her truth. But her scream echoes still, because this was never just about one princess in one empire. This was about power, and the price that power demands from those who cannot refuse to pay it. Every great empire, every golden age of art and architecture and conquest rests on foundations built from countless small sacrifices. The kind that happen behind closed doors, the kind that official histories call necessary. The Ottoman Empire fell a century ago, its palaces turned into museums, its secrets gradually unsealed. But the question Fatma's story asks us remains uncomfortably alive. How many of the structures we call glorious are held together by suffering we have agreed not to see? In the Topkapi Palace archives, there is a single line in a document from 1623. Barely legible now, noted by a scribe who perhaps felt he should record something, anything. It reads, "On the night of the consummation, the princess cried out 3 times. 3 times. That was all the empire allowed her. 3 moments when the silence could not hold, when the conditioning failed, when the truth of what was happening broke through every layer of ritual and propriety and political necessity. They echo still, those 3 screams. Across 600 years, across the ruins of empire, across every attempt to bury them in euphemism and silence. If you listen closely, you can still hear them.